When you're figuring out how to set up your storage, you have to consider two things. One, the space you have, and two, what you're trying to store. I have a general idea of the items I'm trying to store, and they fall into a couple basic categories. I have things that are for lawn care and gardening tools. I've got things that are automotive related for both the car or the bike, working on those. I've got things that are woodworking related, such as saws. I got the air compressor for nail guns, things like that. I have cleaning supplies as well, and I guess you could tack detailing supplies into that. Once you know the categories of items you want to store, next you have to look at where it makes sense to store them. So for example, all my gardening tools, the majority of the yard work we have is outside as we don't have a huge front yard. We're most likely going to go out through the back door, take care of it in the rear yard, then worry about it in the front. Logistically, it just makes sense to put the garden tool hanger on this wall. On a similar note, the lawnmower isn't going to really be going up this 8-inch to a foot step to be going out to the backyard first. We're probably going to wheel it out the front. Makes more sense to store that towards the front of the garage or to an area where it's more easy to get it out the front of the garage. For now we have it there, but as I previously said, we're most likely going to have to move it over into that front corner. That way, one, it's easily accessible to the front, and then two, it's out of the way of the vehicles and the bike path to get the bike parked back here. Another set of items I have is these spare wheels for the Subaru, but a lot of people also have winter tires. I do not have a designated set of winter tires, but my girlfriend currently has a set of designated winter tires for Camry. These are something that you're going to be taking down twice a year, once in the spring to swap to your summers, and then once in the fall to swap back to the winter set. But because it's not something you're going to frequently access, it makes sense to store it in a place that isn't super convenient chest level because it's not a frequent access item. Looking around and knowing what I have available for space, these walls are both wood, so it's easier to just drill things into wherever and it'll support a decent amount of weight. Whereas this one is drywall, so you'll have to get a pretty heavy duty anchor to store something heavy such as a wheel or tire set. Beyond that, this is going to be the workbench location even if I eventually swap out this bench for something else. So most of the things I want to hang above the bench are going to be hand tools that I'll be using at this station or mechanic tools in case I pull something off and I'm working on it over here. Going farther, I know I can't really do it above the garage door tracks because that's going to be really inconvenient and there's not necessarily enough space. It's going to be a bit of a tight fit to fit it along here on either side really, especially with the window in the way. And if I have more than one set of wheels, which I already know I do because I have the spare wheels for this and the set of winter tires for my girlfriend's Camry, I can't fit those both above there just due to the size alone. Additionally, those are going to stick out fairly far from the wall. The outer diameter of something like a set of tires is around 26 inches, which coming out from the wall is going to go to about almost as wide as these trash cans. Because of how far it's protruding, you're going to want to put it higher up so that you're not constantly ducking to maneuver around it. With all that in consideration, what makes sense is to put it high up on this wall, knowing that I'll either have to do a very wide setup to fit the two sets or that I'll have to do a double stack to fit both sets. Another option would be to put some boards up across these rafters like there were before, but I really dislike that option. It's not as easily accessible even with the ladder. Depending on how you store them, if you have it so it's the rolling way, they could potentially roll off onto the car at some point, although it's not extremely likely for that to happen unless there's a slight gradient, which there seems to be for this garage. And all the additional dust up there too, and especially when you're going to wipe it off, could potentially damage the finish of the wheels. It's not a huge deal for a set of wheels like these, which are already relatively inexpensive and have already seen a little bit of abuse. But if I were to get another set for the Mustang or whatever car I owned in the future that was a more performance-oriented car, that would be a little bit of a consideration for me, especially with the wheels on it now. Those are 19-inch wheels, and the track wheels I intend to get it are 18-inch by 10-inch wide wheels. They're not exactly inexpensive. Prematurely wearing out the finish on something like that is something you'd like to avoid if at all possible. Knowing what I would like to hang, the first thing you got to do is inventory what you already have available for hangers. In this case, I have the garden tool hanger that already came when I bought the house. I'll be repositioning that on the back wall, as I said, but it's already available and it makes sense to keep. The gardening tools as a whole, other than the lawnmower, which we already covered, are mostly a shaft with something affixed to the end. So with that in mind, this rack is fine because it's meant to hold things like that. You can also do a wood block that goes up with notches cut out diagonally into it, but I think the amount of space that takes and the benefit you get from that versus something like this is pretty much negligible, so it's not necessarily worth the effort unless you decide you like how it looks more. I do have a bunch of extra brackets for shelving. I've got two of those bigger heavy duty ones. I've got this one that was next to the door with nothing on top of it, which makes no sense to me, and I've got the 7 that came along these two shelves. If you don't already have those brackets for shelving. They're only a couple dollars a piece. Additionally, a piece of oriented strand board like that, that's about $20 for a 4-foot by 8-foot section. And then you can just cut that into about 4 sections or so for a 1-foot wide shelf, and you'll get ample shelving out of that. If for whatever reason you don't like the appearance of that enough, you can get actual plywood that's got this more laminate wood grain finish to it. And depending on the thickness and the type you get, that's probably $30 to $40 for an 8x4 sheet. In this case, this is a budget renovation, so we're just gonna stick with what we already have for the sake of cost. Going beyond that, we have these hang-alls, which are basically, it looks like a hose hanger, but you bolt it into the wall like this and you can hook pretty much anything on it. Similarly, a very good budget-oriented option is just nails. If you look at how this is oriented when it's put into the wall, it's just a slight up hook. To achieve that same thing, a big nail, even if it's not this big, I mean, this thing's about the size of the state of Rhode Island, but you don't necessarily need something as large as this. You can have a nail or a screw that's a reasonable length, a few inches in length, and as long as it's got enough thickness to support the weight of whatever you're hanging on it, which, to be honest, extension cords and things of that nature aren't that heavy, it will be a reasonable budget alternative in that case. Beyond hanging things like extension cords, I mean, if you look at anything else I've gotten here, for example, this bike stand, if I have a heavy-duty nail that's at an angle, that'll sit on there. If I have my rolls of extra cable or speaker wire, that'll also hang on this. If I have 2 of these and I have anything that's like a block of wood or a piece of scrap, I can put it across 2 of them if they're reasonably spaced. You could also do garden tools like that if you really wanted to, because of the length of them. The only real downside is the appearance of it isn't as good as a nice finished shelf, but aesthetics aside, that's a relatively minor drawback when you consider the price of a couple nails versus the price of setting up a whole shelf. Additionally, the level of effort of something like this is substantially less than cutting a shelf and getting everything exactly how you want it hung on the wall, especially if you don't already own a saw or anything like that.